Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Free Assange Vigil. This is a special episode. As we noted earlier in the week, we will be streaming also on Saturdays at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And just for some stats for you all before we begin with this episode, there are 45 days until the start of the second round of Julian Assange's extradition hearing. Of course, that is potentially subject to change. I think next week we will learn a little bit more about that and if that hearing will still take place and begin on May 18th. And then it's 3,406 days since the start of the illegal and arbitrary detention of Julian Assange, and 358 days from his trafficking from Ecuador's embassy in London to Belmarsh prison. And also it is 23 days since Chelsea Manning has been released from federal custody. Of course, I'm Taylor Hudak, and I'm joined by my co-hosts today, Andrew Smith and Steve Poikinen. We have a lot to get into. Much of it does have some, relation to COVID-19 and this ongoing crisis. But before we get into some of the news of the evening, I want to introduce two returning guests. We're very happy to have them back with us. Gordon Dimick and Mohammed El-Massi. So guys, thank you so much for joining us. Josh, if you want to pull up that article for us, we were going to talk with you all today about digital surveillance being used to fight COVID-19. This is obviously something that we've been speaking about quite frequently on the Vigil. So I'll hand it over to one of my co-hosts to kind of discuss this article, and then we'll open it up to the panel.
Yeah, so this is actually a letter here from, or an article on Amnesty International. And what it goes over is a lot of the risks of digital surveillance that can be used, and how the virus itself can be used to justify gross overreaches of human rights violations in regards to surveillance. Do you want to pick it up and read some of this, Steve?
Sure. Let me make sure okay, I'm unmuted. That's helpful. What's really important here is that more than 100 civil society groups signed a joint statement. Like, this is not new information, and when people find out about it, they tend to react viscerally. With governments across the world rapidly expanding the use of digital surveillance in an attempt to combat the COVID-19 pandemic, Amnesty International and other leading NGOs have sent out strict conditions that must be met to safeguard human rights and prevent surveillance overreach. More than 100 civil society groups joined Amnesty in signing the statement, including Access Now, Human Rights Watch, and Privacy International. Technology can play an important role in the global effort to combat the COVID-19 pandemic. However, this does not give governments carte blanche to expand digital surveillance. The recent past has shown governments are reluctant to relinquish temporary surveillance powers. That is putting it mildly. We must not sleepwalk into a permanent expanded surveillance state now, says Rasha Abdul Rahim, Deputy Director of Amnesty Tech. Increased digital surveillance to tackle this public health emergency can only be used if certain strict conditions are met. Authorities cannot simply disregard the right to privacy and must ensure any new measures have robust human rights safeguards. Whether governments use the power of technology as part of their strategy to beat COVID-19, they must do so in a way that respects human rights. Personally, I'm going to editorialize here for a moment, kick it over to Gordon, and then maybe Mo can pick up afterwards. I think we're already past this point. To me, Amnesty's statement sounds a little bit quaint. How about you, G?
Yeah, this is a case of shutting the door after the horse has bolted. I mean, this is something that we're already going through. Mohammed and I went to a screening, I think it was in December, was it, Mo, of The Great NHS Heist by Dr. Bob Gill. And in that film, he talked about, and they talked extensively about how private corporations now hold the details of public people, their health matters, and everything was loaded onto a database from the doctors. Mohammed will probably know more about this than me and be able to expand on that after I finish. But this is already being used in conjunction with the coronavirus. Now, the way I found out that they're using it is there's a food distribution facility just up the road from me, and I went up there last week, and they were saying that they've identified 30,000 or 35,000 families who will be in need of the food distribution, the food packages that they send out most. And they found out that in conjunction with doctors through the NHS. And the problem with that is obviously these systems are set up via private contractors, and then the information gets sold on to Lord knows where. And I'm sure Mohammed will know more about me with regards to the details of how these details are being just sold off to third parties. Maybe you could expand on that, Mo.
Yeah, so first, thanks everybody for hosting this. Gordon, that's excellent memory. That's right, it was December. Drew McFadden directing and Dr. Bob Gill producing the great NHS heist. I think anybody that can should go to Vimeo and rent or buy it. It's only a few quid. But yeah, I'm actually looking at a Bloomberg article, which I mean, first, let me say, I think it's obvious that technology inevitably needs to be used to be able to tackle social problems, right? That's why technology exists, or certainly one of the reasons why it exists. And so it is inevitable that any tools that exist will be taken advantage of. I mean, in the literal sense of the word, taken advantage of, not necessarily with a negative connotation. And even possibly expanded, which is why transparency and safeguards are so important, although we seem to be rather lacking in both regards. So I'm just looking at a Bloomberg article that somebody shared with me. It says, Palantir in talks with Germany, France for virus fighting tool. And so this is a side-related matter if we're referring to private for-profit corporations working with healthcare systems. Palantir Technologies is a data analytics company, and it's in talks with governments across Europe regarding, well, how to combat COVID-19, the spread of COVID-19, and to help make healthcare systems more efficient. I'm just going to have a little quote over here. Palantir, which got its start doing projects for the US Central Intelligence Agency, has said its technology can do everything from helping to trace and analyze the spread of the virus to helping hospitals predict staff and supply shortages and finding bottlenecks in the medical supply chain. The company is also telling the prospective customers that it can help countries with plans to exit quarantine measures, the person said. So that's in a Bloomberg article dated 1st of April. So yeah, so an organization, for-profit data analytics organization whose first major client was the CIA, is now offering its services to healthcare providers to help monitor and track and trace the spread of COVID-19. Now, that's not to say that their services won't actually do that. I'm just curious as to why things are at the state of affairs that this is who we're dependent upon. Two, can we really just say that we can just absolutely just trust on faith that a CIA-linked, surveillance company essentially can provide services without any backdoors, without guarantees that none of this information will then be provided on to second or third parties? What guarantees are there, not just in practice, in theory and law, right, with these contracts, but in practice? Because you can have things written, you can even have very good contracts signed with companies. Let's say you actually have civil servants who actually are signing excellent contracts with third-party companies. How do you then monitor it, and what do you do to force breaches? What kind of backdoors could there be? As the film that was referred to by Gordon, The Great NHS Heist, by Dr. Bob Gill and Drew McFadden, points out, there is already vast amounts of private data, even if it is anonymized data, that is in the hands of for-profit companies. And there's very little transparency about it. So it's, yeah, so in that regard, I think it behooves all of us to do what we can. I think freedom of information requests are going to have to be made. Of course, we do see relaxation of rules under the data protection laws as a result of part of these emergency measures, which mean that I know in Scotland they can take longer to respond than they otherwise would, which, as one commentator put it, you can really tell which rules and rights the state sees either as necessary to maybe subdue as part of combating COVID-19, but also others which are they see more as a nuisance during normal times. So it's like, well, great, this is just irritating, constantly having to answer freedom of information requests. So let's just add another 10 days or 10 weeks or whatever the case may be. I know we're going to get to it, so I'll let you guys decide when we get to it. I'll just mention the fact that under the Coronavirus Act 2020 here in the UK, surveillance, there have been certain adjustments to the main surveillance law. So the Investigatory Powers Act 2016 was passed essentially to retroactively legalize what was revealed by Edward Snowden in terms of what was being done by our version of the NSA, which is the GCHQ, the Government Communications Headquarters. And so part of the Coronavirus Act has extended the time period that surveillance warrants can exist without getting approval from a judge. How much time you need to go to a judge has moved from, I think, 3 days to 12. It's either 12 days or 12 working days. Obviously, there's a significant, there's quite a difference there. Up to a year, these changes can last. Also changes to how long fingerprints and DNA can be retained by up to 12. I think it can be extended for 6 months, but lots of these regulations are supposed to expire, right? So they will, the regulations would expire up to 12 months later. But that's only because of pressure even before the bill got passed. So just so people understand, these are the kinds of things that are going on.
And if we can actually pull up that Big Brother Watch article about the emergency coronavirus powers that were granted under this recent act over in the UK. Because there's quite a bit in it that's just straight up authoritarian, the way that they're allowed to go through. The Emergency
Before we do
Coronavirus
that,
Act.
real quick, let me add that in addition to France and Germany, Palantir is also contracted through the UK and the NHS to do exactly what they're doing to France and Germany. I did a show about this. It's all kind of running together, but I think it was at the beginning of the week. Because Elizabeth Mueller had done some fantastic research digging into Palantir, and Palantir, of course, turns up multiple times in the global intelligence files. WikiLeaks had just massive drop as part of the Stratfor hack. Palantir played a central role in that. Peter Thiel, basically modern day robber baron. Absolutely no reason to trust this guy whatsoever. And now we've got the Big Brother Watch article up, so let's go through that a little bit.
Yeah, the Emergency Coronavirus Act contains the most draconian laws ever in peacetime Britain. It was rushed through Parliament in 3 days, thanks to many hundreds of you for taking part in the 2 years too long campaign. The government amended the act to include a 6-month review. They published a monthly emergency powers and civil liberties. We, as in Big Brother Watch, is going to publish an emergency powers and civil liberties report documenting any excessive and unlawful use of powers. They're going to send a copy each month to each of the MPs, and you could subscribe. Their first report's coming out in April. But the facts of this, the extraordinary circumstances requiring extraordinary measures, but we can't let basic rights fall casualty to this crisis. The Coronavirus Act contains the most draconian powers ever in peacetime Britain, including forced detention and isolation of anyone, including children, for any amount of time. Authorities can forcibly take biological samples. There's no clear legal rights from, as of yet, unidentified isolated facilities. Lockdown powers could prevent protests against the measures. State surveillance safeguards have been weakened, and protections from forced detainment and treatment under the Mental Health Act have been lowered. The Emergency Powers and Civil Liberties Report. Emergency powers are needed to protect public health. However, authorities need to use them in a proportionate, lawful, and strictly temporary way to protect our democracy in the long run. That's why we're producing monthly reports exposing excessive uses of emergency powers, which analyze the recommendations that will be published here, and we'll send an emergency powers and civil liberties report to every parliamentarian every month. Our first month's report is due Monday, April 27th, 2020. We're going to keep a close eye on the creation and use of the government databases, including phone tracking. We'll be going to engage with authorities in challenging the use of emergency powers that unlawfully curb civil liberties. If you have any tips, please reach out to them and let them know. This is something that you cover pretty extensively, Mo. So if you could weigh in here a little bit about kind of the way you see this going and if you think it's actually going to be a temporary measure.
Sorry, I had to laugh at the question. Go on, carry on, Mo.
Oh, no, go ahead, Gordon.
Yeah, the Patriot Act, mate. The Patriot Act came in, 2002? It was meant to be temporary. You know, it's been used for 17 years to wage war around the world. Whatever they bring in temporarily, whatever rights they take away from you temporarily today, you won't be getting back tomorrow. And this is something that Big Brother Watch are talking about here. I believe that I know they got it down to 6 months, but 6 months, Big Brother Watch. I believe it still stays on the statute for 2 years, and also there's no judicial oversight of it either. So I don't think you can even challenge it in the courts. That's I think Mo will be able to tell you more about that. But yeah, Patriot Act, as far with regards to it being temporary, Patriot Act, that was temporary. It's still being used to wage war around the world today, and they've just extended it a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, I don't think any rights that they take away from us today, I don't think we're going to be getting back tomorrow.
Well, we know, I mean, at least we in America know that once emergency powers are granted, they seldom ever go away. We've got, we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of the Patriot Act here soon. Before too long, we're about a year away from it. The privileges that the national security state was given in the Patriot Act have never gone away. And in fact, they've only become more and more draconian and more extreme as surveillance capitalism becomes one of the driving vehicles of the US economy and the global economy for that matter. So this is highly disconcerting in terms of personal liberties.
The way you're saying highly disconcerting with regards to civil liberties. The way I think this is going to go, and the way I would look at this, I mean, I've read Snowden's book, by the way. If anybody out there hasn't read it yet, go and read it. It's a real eye opener. You will understand how your phone, even though it's sitting there with the screen off, if there's Facebook on it, every 3 seconds it's sending a signal out going, I'm here. So at any point, just through an app, they know exactly where you are, down to the geolocation of your phone on this planet. And obviously most people take their phones with them everywhere. Mine's attached to my hip. So I can understand that they're going to be using this. I mean, just knowing what I know about Snowden and what he's written, and obviously he says however bad the surveillance is over in America, it's much worse in the UK, and you only need to drive down the motorway to see the evidence of that, or go out anywhere in London, you're on a camera wherever you go. But I can imagine that they're going to be using it if there is an outbreak of somebody having a coronavirus in an area. I can imagine that they're going to be using the phones to track who was in the close proximity to them. Now, you might actually look at that and say, oh, well, that's a really good idea. I mean, you'll be able to close down the outbreak. And to that, I will say, yeah, you're right. Really great idea. But then when the coronavirus is over and we don't, and those rules aren't taken away, what happens? Well, then you've got any crime that happens that will track you via your phone to people in the air. It's already happening, and this is, I think, just more of a rolling out of these draconian rules and erosion of civil liberties. under the guise of keeping you safe. And of course, as you guys in America know, Benjamin Franklin once said, those who want to give away even the slightest civil liberty in pursuit of safety has neither. And I think that's where we're heading.
Do you want to weigh in at all, Mo, about the Coronavirus Act?
So yeah, there are plenty of organizations and individuals that have been pointing out, in case there are people out there who think this is a fringe point, or only a point that even maybe like Amnesty International, Big Brother Watch might bring up. So the International Center for Not-for-Profit Law and the European Center for Not-for-Profit Law have established, in conjunction with other organizations, a worldwide COVID civic freedoms tracker. So it's quite useful for researchers and journalists and anybody else who's interested. And what they have is just a list of the names of countries starting with A all the way down to Z, and in there you'll find a little synopsis of sort of changes to laws as they affect civil liberties, with like links to the source material, like the Coronavirus Act. And they themselves note that a crisis are often used or can be used as a pretext by governments to infringe on rights. And they quote, I'm going to pronounce Fionnuala Ní Olán, the UN Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms while countering terrorism. What a great title. I wonder when that position was created. And she notes that states, quote, states and security sector institutions will find emergency powers attractive because they offer shortcuts, end quote, with the result being that
Yeah, so it looks like Mo actually cut out there on us, so I want to apologize to him for that. But the larger point that I think that he was trying to make here is that these powers aren't going to go away, that this isn't something that is a temporary measure. This is the institution of what can be considered a new normal at this point, where now people know that the government is going to be keeping track of every bit of them and tracing them through this, literally their daily lives, to see who they're interacting with and if that's creating any type of issue. Which kind of gets us into our next article here. It's the first Sputnik one, Josh, about the COVID-19 conviction being quashed after British transport police admit the emergency law was misused. This was one of the first cases in the UK of someone actually being detained under this COVID-19 Act, and the police don't even know how they're supposed to be detaining people under this new law. Do you want to pick this one up, Steve?
Say that one more time so everyone can get a complete picture of just how, I don't know, Faustian the bargain state governments have made with surveillance technology. Just say that last thing you just said one more time.
That the police don't even inherently know what the laws are that they're supposed to be enforcing at this point, because of how quickly this was rolled out.
They don't. I was out 2 days ago, and I had to catch a train. I'm a journalist. I'm an essential worker, and as I got to the train station, there were two policemen outside, and they were asking me, if you go on a train anywhere in the UK now, you're going to get asked why you're going, where you're coming from, where you're going to. It's I got asked several times in one journey, and I spoke to the policeman about it. They obviously, once I told them I was a journalist, we started talking, and I was saying to them, how are you finding things? Are you getting any mixed signals? And the both of them started laughing when I said that. He said, "Oh, mate," he says, "we got Boris Johnson telling us one thing, and we got our bosses telling us another." He said, they don't know they don't know what the rules are, what they can do and what they can't do. These are the bobbies on the street. These are the people that are outside the train station asking people where you're going, why you're going there. They don't know how to implement the rules or what the rules are. So if they don't know how to implement the rules or what the rules are, what the bloody hell is the point of them being outside a train station asking everybody where they're going and what they're doing? Of course, this is leading to the rules being implemented unevenly again. Obviously, if you're a poorer looking person with brown skin, for instance, you're probably more likely to get a fine than you are if you're white and you say you're a journalist. And obviously, when I was speaking to the coppers, the one guy said to me, he said, if we ask somebody where they're going and they say, oh, I'm going to pick up nappies for my baby, there's nothing that they can do. So a simple lie is all it needs to actually get round and flout these laws. So the police have got an unenviable task just to implement the rules that have been set down for them. And that's even if they understand the rules in the first place, which they don't. At least the ones I spoke to didn't.
What is the reaction to this? Is there any pushback? Because there's a lot of criticism from people who are really frightened by these sorts of measures being put in place, that people really push back on this. Are people accepting of this? And I guess that's really indicative of how much fear has been instilled in us because of this virus.
Well, as far as I can see, Taylor, from what I can see over here, the vast majority of people are taking this serious and staying at home and are following the orders. And obviously, it's a very frightening time for people at the moment over here. I've been speaking to people in my community who are very worried, especially those who, there are people that I know that suffer from anxiety and depression and PTSD, etc., etc. And this is not a good time for those people, especially being isolated. And then you've got the problem of isolation for people over here that are maybe in abusive relationships, and now they're stuck at home with their abuser. These are problems that have all come up as a result of this. But as generally, people have been very accepting of the rules as they came in and been following the rules over here. It's only really the isolated incident where people are flouting the rules, and after the first week where everybody panicked a little bit, the second week everybody settled down in the UK. And I think once we realised that off licences were going to stay open as they were deemed to be an essential business, the UK went, yeah, okay, we're going to survive this. Let's go home, get drunk and watch Netflix.
Now, Mo, you just got back with us, and you did write this article. So if you want to just provide your thoughts on this sort of miscommunication and this mass confusion that's going on. And we're talking about your article, COVID-19 conviction to be quashed after British transport police admit emergency law was misused. If you want to just kind of provide an overview of this article and maybe what you were most surprised about throughout your research.
Apologies. I do seem to be having internet issues, so hopefully it won't happen again where I get just dropped out, but it might happen again. So we'll deal. It's been happening all week actually. So you guys haven't discussed the piece while I was gone?
We're in the middle.
We haven't got into it yet.
Okay. Okay. So there's a great website that I encourage everybody to look at, and in fact, I've gotten already 2 of my articles from there. And it's a joint project with the Network for Police Monitoring, the Undercover Research Group. And they've got a website, a blog, essentially called Policing the Corona State. Yeah. And in there, they've got a diary, and they will have links to various stories, including where they have more questions to be raised, and this particular story that I've covered was on their blog post, right? So I had originally referred to it in one article when this woman who was apparently loitering, as they say, in a train station in Newcastle, British Transport Police approached her, questioned her regarding what was her reasonable excuse for being in transport, because it's only supposed to be emergency key workers, although that is not a law. So it's important for people to understand. So you have laws, and then you have guidance that comes from ministers. But as one former Supreme Court justice here pointed out, guidance from ministers is not a replacement for the law. So and I know it seems strange, and actually it's not 100% the police fault, and I'm no, yeah, I'm I'll be as critical of police as the next person, but you
Now, I'd like
have
to jump in there, Mark. Let me jump
yeah,
in there
yeah.
and just say, when I spoke to the policeman, what was it, day before yesterday, I felt sorry for them after the conversation. I had a 5-minute, 10-minute conversation with them, and I actually felt sorry for them because they were more confused than the rest of us.
Exactly. So it's you have the natural inclinations of the police, which is to assume that people can't police themselves, as it were. You know what I mean? That people need to be policed, and that is engendered into the structure of the police force. So whatever you may be like as an individual, if you stay within an institution, this is the thinking of the institution. Even though, by the way, in the UK, there's a saying that goes back to the man who founded the modern British police force, Sir Robert Peel, who was a former prime minister as well as a Home Office minister and a colonial administrator of Ireland, actually before he founded the modern British police force. And it's called policing. Now, the extent to which they actually do that in practice is up for debate, right? But actually, if you look at most recent documents, they still mention that we're here to police by consent, right? With the consent of the public, right? We're meant to be, if you like, citizens to a certain extent, where we are a citizen police force. I mean, it's not, I don't think it's actually true, but that is a mentality that's out there. But that being said, as Gordon's pointed out, I mean, if you look at it, there's so many different laws and rules and regulations and emergency powers and then guidance, and the prime minister will say one thing, and then maybe a guidance will say something different. And so it leads to a situation where British Transport Police go to this woman. She refuses to answer their questions as to explain why she's there. Is the connection working, by the way? Because all your screens seem to have frozen.
Yeah, it's still working. You're still up and running well.
Okay. She refuses to ask questions, which it turns out is her right under the Coronavirus Act, at least. And they say, well, because she's not prepared to justify her presence there, they give her an on-the-spot fine of 60 quid, so that's £60, which is, quite frankly, as somebody who for many years has been working freelance, that's a lot of money. That's like the amount, it used to be the amount that you got for unemployment insurance for like a week, right here. Might be a bit more now. And then she was detained. She was arraigned, prosecuted before a judge, right? It's a magistrate's court, and was convicted. She didn't appear before the judge. It was decided on the papers. So she was, I think, in a holding cell. And the judge fined her £660 on top of the £60 fine that the police fined her, along with 80 quid victim, court costs, and then another 70 quid or so, like victim surcharge. I'm not sure which victim gets that, who the victim is, right? So I think that's a bit cheeky, but there you go. It was later determined after press and various legal experts started looking into the case, because it was a case that happened to be reported in the press. Bear in mind, most cases don't get reported in the press, right? So the victim surcharge is 66 quid, 85 pounds in court costs. They determined that it's actually unlawful. We accept that this shouldn't have happened, and we apologize, a statement from the BTP, the British Transport Police, and the Crown Prosecution Service said. It is highly unusual that a case can pass through a number of controls in the criminal justice process and fail in this way, said Deputy Chief Constable Adrian Handstock. Maybe we'll agree to disagree. So here's a point that's made, yeah? Schedule 21 of the Coronavirus Act 2020 creates an offense of, quote, failing without reasonable excuse. And then that becomes the whole test. What is a reasonable excuse, right? To comply with any direction, reasonable instruction, requirement, or restriction, right? Imposed as part of the act. But the law can only apply to, quote, potentially infectious persons, end quote. So there was no evidence for them, there's no guidelines. So like, if you look at this person, there was no basis for them to assume that she's a potentially infectious person, right? And that rule does not give police the ability to what's known as stop an account. There are other powers, stop and account powers, which are sort of, I'm sure you guys have heard of stop and search. You've got stop and frisk in the United States, right? Or in certain places in the United States, we've got stop and search here. Where if you're believed, if you're suspected to be committing a crime or about to commit a crime or having committed a crime, If they have reasonable suspicion, it's a lower threshold than probable cause, then they can stop you and search you. Stop an account is different. That stop is basically the police have the right under certain circumstances to say account for yourself. Why? Right? Because you don't actually have to answer them. And as guidance from the National Police Chiefs Association, or the College of Policing, I forgot even the name, there's so many different names. Hold on a second. The National Police Chiefs Council, and the College of Policing states, there is no power to stop an account under the Coronavirus Act and the Coronavirus Regulations 2020. And that's important to note as well. That so basically the CPS and British Transport Police have written to the Westminster Magistrates Court, and they've said, this is the situation. We were wrong on the law, so can you please vacate the verdict, right? Which will probably happen then, right? Because it's both the police and the prosecutor. But that means a district judge and magistrates court was also wrong on the law, right? That means a district judge didn't look at this and be like, wait, upon what basis were you did you detain her using the Coronavirus Act? Don't you know that you can't compel somebody who you know, she wasn't apparently, did you have reason to suspect that she was infectious, right? Was she like sweating profusely and coughing, shivering, or, you know, did you have reason to suspect that she'd been with somebody else that was in that situation? So it's good for her that because of outside pressure and inquiry and questioning from experts and the press, her conviction will be overturned now, right, by the court, almost certainly, right? The thing is, this is only happening because of public scrutiny. So for those out there, and I do see them, and I heard the question you asked Gordon. I know Gordon, I don't know if he had to leave yet, because I know he'll have to leave soon. Oh, he's there, okay. Is that there are people, and they're responding to my tweets as well, like, why don't you write articles about all the times the police get things right? Which I don't even know what that means. I'm like, you know, the police promote their stories all the time. They have Twitter feeds and press statements all the time, like talking about the reason we even know about this woman, who is fined, by the way, and convicted, the one I'm talking about right now, is because the police promoted the story as one of an example of when they got it right. And as press started to ask further questions about it, and legal experts started to probe more, it turns out, oh, they didn't get it right. Yeah. So it's like the only way you can, all these new guidelines that are being passed out and published and what have you, the reasons these even happen are precisely because there's pushback, because there's pressure for scrutiny. I'll just finalize on this point. What happens with these emergency powers when they get passed is that, you know, there is a tendency in any class-based system, and capitalism, which we all live in variations of capitalist systems, is a class-based system, towards authoritarianism, right? That's just where the tendency is towards. So without immense levels of pushback, temporary emergency measures become permanent. A perfect example is how during the so-called Troubles, a low-intensity armed conflict in the north of Ireland between Protestants and Catholics and the British military, if you like, the British establishment, who were also there. Jury trials were suspended as a temporary measure, something that was proposed very recently in Scotland, although temporarily defeated, right? I discussed this with Steve the other day. Mm-hmm. Now that we were told that would be temporary, and there's all kinds of reasons they had to suspend jury trials because of the sectarianism, because of threats, because of retribution. That was a few decades ago. Jury trials have still not been returned to the north of Ireland, right? They've still got judge-only trials, despite the fact that there are people campaigning to have it returned, right? So rights, once taken, are very, very difficult to be to be regained, right? So A, that's why you have to have pressurize not to lose certain rights, and B, that's why you have to push forward sunset clauses and renewal clauses and all these things that make it more and more difficult for certain emergency powers to last. So that at the very least there has a renewal process, and you want expiry clauses and all the rest of it. So the Coronavirus Act has a renewal clause after 6 months. The only reason that's there is because of pushback and threats of rebellion and all the rest of it. Originally, it was meant to expire after 2 years, or I can't remember the exact wording, but it was supposed to last 2 years. So, these things, they don't happen automatically. People have to push for them. People have to demand them. People have to be vigilant, and people have to get their head out of the clouds. Say, on the one hand, we respect the fact that emergency services are doing the best they can. On the other hand, we also have to have a more fair understanding of the nature of these institutions to begin with. And let's be honest, there are segments of society which receive a police force and segments of society which receive a police service. And obviously those who are used to receiving a police service will have a very different impression of how the police behave and why they exist and the job they do than those who receive a police force, right? And those who are policed rather than those who on whose behalf the police exist.
Michael Perini, who is a U.S. Progressive political scientist, has said for years now that there are people who think that the police's primary function is to provide the services that you were just talking about, Mo. And he says this is simply untrue. The primary function of the police is social control and the protection of private property. And that's it. And like, once you can look at it through that lens, even if you haven't experienced a billy club across the head personally, like I have, even if you haven't had your face ground into the gravel and then yanked back up by your hair and a can of mace emptied into your eyeballs, like I have, once you look at it through that lens, then it starts to click a little bit.
And the thing that terrifies me the most about this Coronavirus Act is that potentially infectious person line. Because what that's doing is it's setting the stage for the new terrorist, where if you're a potentially infected person or an asymptomatic carrier, that can literally be anyone at any time for any reason without actual evidence of it. Because we don't have access to testing here in the United States. The UK, we were talking to Gordon about it a little bit before this, you have to pay absurd amounts of money to actually get tested. And it's going to turn into a situation where the people in power may let it ride for a week or two. And then the next thing you know, journalists are being reported as asymptomatic carriers and have to be forced into mandatory quarantine at the same time that Julian Assange, 45 days from now, will be facing trial. And if 3 weeks out from that trial, for some reason, all of those journalists that cover Julian Assange's case are now asymptomatic carriers or potentially infectious people, they're going to limit the amount of actual press exposure that happens in that room. And we know just by the bail hearing that there's not many journalists even willing to go to Belmarsh to cover Julian's situation right now. So if the government were to roll something out like this, and I hate to put this idea into the ether, but I'm sure they've had it already, it's going to dramatically limit the way that people can actually access information as more and more people get flagged as potentially infectious persons, and it gets used in conjunction with these intelligence agencies that are known to be nefarious. They can call basically anyone a potentially infectious person and either get them forced quarantined in their house or forced quarantined in a government facility. So if you could, Gordon, could you talk about the nature of how testing is actually going on in the UK right now? Because that was really enlightening earlier.
Yeah, surely. Basically, up until now, it seems, Mo will probably back me up on this. If you're rich or you're a royal or you're a member of parliament or etc., you'll get tested because it's good propaganda to say that, hey, Prince Charles has got the coronavirus, let's stick it out. But if you're a frontline nurse and doctor, yeah, you don't get tested. That's the way they're using the tests at the moment. It's very sporadic. There's no rhyme or reason to it. And literally just before I came on air, in my own town, there were up-popped capitalism and somebody who was taking advantage of this situation, and lo and behold, a private company has set up 2 areas actually in the West Midlands right now where you can go and get tested and have your results back pretty quick for a price of £249. You drive up to a car park, get swabbed, and then drive off, and then you get the results a little while later. This is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous that not only is there not mass testing available at all, but also that if you're rich or an actor etc., you can get tested pretty quickly. But if you're a doctor and you're an NHS nurse on the front lines with no PPE by the look of it, very little of it, personal protective equipment to actually protect them from this, they can't get tested. And there are even reports of nurses who have symptoms of the coronavirus who still can't get tested, you know. So it looks like they're only selective testing people for propaganda purposes at the moment. And then you've got nefarious people who just want to make money out of it and are selling these tests for £249. It's a ridiculous situation. The profiteering needs to be bloody stopped. We haven't got a healthcare system over here for profit like you have in America. We actually have a national health service, although it has been ripped apart over the last 40 years of neoliberalism and sold off with various pieces and made unprofitable with Tony Blair's PFIs, etc. And that's without the austerity in the last 10 years that has ripped through the health service from the Tories have inflicted on them. So that's the situation over here at the moment with the testing. They're saying, the governments are, that they're going to test more and more people, but they keep coming out with these figures that are just pie in the sky, and they're not hitting the ones that they've given already. So I consider that this will carry on, and they will carry on testing people selectively. I.e., if you're famous and you're showing symptoms, yeah, they'll test you because they can stick that in the news. Whereas a nurse being tested and getting the coronavirus, that's bad for it, so they won't test her. You see my point. And this is the way it's going to carry on, by the look of it. They're going to, whenever there is a period of chaos, whenever there is a period of uncertainty, whenever there is this... whenever there is confusion, there are people who are trying to maximize it and take power, and that's exactly what's happening by the look of it at the moment. They are using this pandemic to implement their own agenda by the look of it, and they're using, you know, you only need to look at the way they're testing people to see evidence of that. If you're famous, you'll get tested. If you're a nurse or a doctor and you're showing symptoms, you got no chance. And that's basically the way it's going in this country.
And that's even similar to here, where you saw Rand Paul, U.S. Senator, get tested being completely asymptomatic with literally no known exposure to the virus, essentially. And there's people out in the streets, there's people in my personal life that I know that them and their children are both sick, and they've sought testing 3 or 4 times, and they go to their primary physician and they say, oh, well, it's not bad enough for you to get tested yet. You have to wait till X, Y, or Z symptoms show up on top of what you're already experiencing before we can even write you a prescription to get a test. And then once they go get tested, it's, oh, well, you know, we got a 7 to 10 day waiting period before we're actually going to get these results back. So by the time it's already run its course and gotten to the point of being full strength, we'll find out if we're actually going to treat you like you have it or not. Until then, just lock yourself in your home and take Tylenol. So the response across the board and across the globe is just absolutely insane. And the fact that people are just willing to accept the plandemic at this point that's laid out in Event 201, and with the largest bailout in American history, literally the largest theft of taxpayer money, that just rolled past Congress in a couple days with no debate, really just shows how absurd everything is at this point, because their governments aren't trying to fight the virus. Governments are trying to instill propaganda, fear, and make a shitload of money for them and their friends.
That's exactly right. And the thing that another thing that worries me as well, and that really is a bugbear of mine, is that the media, so as it is the legacy media, they're not holding them to account at all. They're just repeating propaganda. Again, they're just doing the same thing as they always do. You know, I saw the Huffington Post actually doing stories the other day of, stories today of rating the homes of the famous people who are doing their podcasts from home, actually rating their homes. They, you know, it's either propaganda or it's bullshit clickbait that they're giving people in the media. It's really disgusting, and it's time for a new one.
And you know what? There are people out there who are also honestly providing their audiences with some very dangerous information, like saying that we should be handling climate change like we're handling COVID-19. I can't even begin to describe how unbelievably dangerous that is, considering the response here is just, in my opinion, completely unacceptable and very frightening. It's been a main theme of this vigil in particular, where we're talking about how losing our rights during this time will make it very, very difficult to get them back. If you look historically, usually when rights are taken away, they're not given back. But Gordon, I know that you do have to head out, and you have a stream of your own coming up. So why don't you give us your final thoughts and let everybody know where they can find you on social media and find your work as well. Thank you so much for joining us. Always great to have you on.
Thanks very much, Tyler. Yeah, my final thoughts on this are this. I understand that there's a lot of questions out there, unanswered questions that people are asking right now, and I understand that the governments, etc., have been lying to us all our lives. But this is a real thing. This is something that we've actually really got to take serious. Stay at home, practice your social distancing, really, all of that advice is good advice, and it's actually protecting us. Just because we're questioning why they're doing certain things, that doesn't mean we're questioning that the coronavirus is fake. I certainly do not believe that. I am taking it very serious, and everybody should too. But we have to be really careful of what rights they take away in the name of safety right now, because like you guys have said all throughout this stream, and like Mohammed said, it happened in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, whatever they take away, whatever draconian measures they use right now in the name of safety, we're not going to be getting back anytime soon. And if you want evidence of that, really, to get those measures back, we really need a robust opposition in this country, and the opposition in this country just elected the former head of the CPS. So yeah, be careful what they take away, because I don't think we're going to get them back anytime soon. Yeah, be vigilant. Thanks very much, everybody.
Yeah, Gordon, thank you.
Thank you,
coming
Gordon.
on.
And so before we pull up the Scottish government's plans to drop the abolishment of juries, I want to talk for a minute about the relation between climate change and COVID-19, because there's tons of people across the media spectrum that are saying this is what we need to do. We need to lock everything and shut everything down just like we are now, and then rebuild this infrastructure. When really what we need to do right now is create a mass decentralization movement where people in their communities take up solving these problems on the most local level with their city officials. And that's everything from food production to internet to cell phone usage to encryption softwares, and across the board. Because if we can't just secure the basic community rights to food, the community right to internet, and the community right to actually assemble to make further decisions, we've pretty much lost everything. If we just expect someone hundreds or thousands of miles away or from non-elected global institutions to just make decisions and directives about how to change the world, we may as well not even have city governments at this point, because all they are is the pothole fixers, when there is so much more power that can be built in a community to make it sustainable. And the conversations focus almost wholly in the climate change world around carbon, and carbon's being put in the atmosphere, and this is the only thing that's bad, while deforestation gets ignored, while actual preventative measures to prevent forest fires and to clear brush gets ignored, while the islands of trash that exist in our oceans get ignored, while there's not a push for a sustainability system using 3D printing to create your basic household materials gets ignored. So to the point of COVID-19 needs to be the same kind of response to climate change, I'm not willing to give up any rights to climate change or to COVID-19. But what I am willing to do is to try to build my city and my community the best I can, so that way they don't rely on international institutions, and sustainability can be something that happens at the city level to make these differences, where people can make the decisions locally about how to best handle the sustainability of their community, rather than having someone all the way at the top in these national or global institutions saying, no, this is how it's done. If it doesn't work for your city's gone. So I think
Yeah,
that
but
that's
here's the thing, Andrew. You can't make Bill Gates, globalist, robber baron, pirate, thief, the smiling, benevolent face and savior of the entire planet if you focus on local sustainability endeavors. That's not how that works. You can't take this man who is openly for population control and eugenics after a long rehabilitation with Microsoft trust violations. You can't rehabilitate that character and elevate him to a position of global authority if what you're doing is saying you need to make your community food secure. You need to be able to provide a free universal broadband service to your town. You need to be able to set up mesh networks. Bill Gates can't be the hero in this situation, and that's not what he has shelled out millions and millions and millions of dollars in a media rehabilitation to become.
No, that's a great point, Steve. Mo, I
You're
know
muted,
that you
T.
do have I am. I'm okay. So,
No,
Mo,
you're not
I know
now.
that you do have. Okay, Mo, I know that you do have to head off now. But why don't we, before you do jump off the stream here, why don't we talk about the latest update on Assange? I'm seeing here on Twitter. This was posted by Christine Assange, Julian's mom. She's saying here in a tweet that the UK Ministry of Justice confirms it will not release Julian Assange with 4,000 other prisoners. So they're not going to release him. I'm not sure if you guys touched on this earlier, but I think it's important that we did let everybody know about that. Remember that during this hearing, which you covered, Mo, the most recent hearing, the U.S. was claiming that it was up to the Ministry of Justice to make this bail decision. That's what the U.S. was arguing, and there's confirmation that they will not release him. So
on
Mo,
matters of health. On matters of health, they were arguing that under the Bail Act, 1976, if it's a question of the health, that it should be down to the Ministry of Justice. Rather, they weren't saying that in all cases of bail, it's the Ministry of Justice that has to decide. Obviously, it's judges that decide on bail. But on that specific point of health. Yeah, so it's been reported today that 4,000 low-level offenders, so we're talking about low-level theft or drug possession, people convicted for low-level theft or drug possession will be released, and who would otherwise be released in the next 2 months. The Minister for Justice said that they'll be releasing them essentially in the coming days. Marty Silk, who also attended the hearing with me, who's one of the journalists who's been coming to most of the hearings as I've been coming to them as well. He works for the Australian Associated Press, the AAP. He's their UK correspondent, he's a correspondent reporter with the WAP. And this is what the Ministry of Justice told him further to, I can't remember if it was a freedom of information request, but that he put to them. So good on Marty Silk for getting this quote. This response, they point out that Julian Assange, who's being held on remand in Belmarsh prison, remand just means pre-trial detention, right? Because he's not been convicted of anything. I mean, he was convicted for jumping bail, but he finished that sentence, 50-week sentence, September last year. Julian Assange, who's being held on remand in Belmarsh prison, will not be temporarily released because he's not serving a custodial sentence and therefore not eligible. So I just want people to think about the Kafkaesque nature and circular nature of that argument, right? That's a statement from the Ministry of Justice to Marty Silk.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The 4,000 people will be eligible because they're serving low-level custodial sentences or coming to their end of their custodial sentences for low-level offenses, drug possession, low-level theft. But because Julian Assange is being held without trial yet, his pre-trial detention, he doesn't qualify.
I'm not over here laughing because it's funny. I'm just laughing at the absurdity of, well, how could we possibly release him? We haven't convicted him of anything yet. Like,
Exactly.
what the fuck? Ah, sorry. Sorry to
Yeah,
anyone
but
who's offended by
it's
a queer.
it is
I was
it
trying
is
to be good today.
it is brilliant. That's what I was saying when I read that. I was like, okay, that's brilliantly. Yeah, I mean, I know terms like Orwellian and Kafkaesque get thrown around a lot, but it is very much so. It's like, sorry, we can't release you because you have yet to be convicted. We're only releasing convicts, right? And bear in mind, lots of these people they're releasing, they're tagging them with GPS tags and all the rest of it, right? So that's according to an article in the Telegraph, also known as the Tory Graph, because of its links to the Tory party. So yeah, that's the situation there. Scotland is also. Oh, sorry, is somebody else coming on? Wants to say something? They're also looking at early release for prisoners in Scotland. But bear in mind, this is only happening also because of pressure. Originally, the Ministry of Justice said they wouldn't be releasing anybody, but now you have 88 prisoners testing positive. One prisoner who was in their 80s who died a week back. 15 other prison officers or prison workers also testing positive. And this is across the country, right? So there's prisons. This is just England and Wales, not Scotland, because there's different statistics are being collected there by the Scottish government, right? Because you have devolved powers, right? So there's a Scottish government there, even though there will be the ability to legislate to influence Scotland and the north of Ireland over here in Westminster, because they're not completely independent, obviously. So you also have, I think, I read up to a fifth or up to a quarter of all prison staff are self-isolating now. So we're really seeing the consequences of years of privatization and cuts to public services. Here's one fun fact. Britain has one of the lowest beds to population ratios in terms of its hospital beds we're talking about. In the entire sort of industrialized world, with an average of 2 beds per 1,000. In some cases, some areas, it's 1 or 1.5 beds per 1,000 people. Compare that to Japan, 13 per 1,000, or Germany, I think is 9. And then you look at France and some other countries where you're looking at 6 or 5. And that's a huge difference. That's another reason why, but lots of people don't seem to understand that that's another reason why you have the lockdown, right? Is to suppress as much as possible the virus and the spreading of the virus, because even though it's calculated that up to even 2/3 of the people who die, I'm not saying they will, might have died anyway within 12 months. Spread out, you know what I mean, because of various conditions they have and because they're older and what have you. But it wouldn't be happening all at the same time, right? So here's the thing: is if you have a healthcare system that's cut to the bare bones, then if you have loads of people coming in more than you're expecting within any time frame, that puts loads of pressure, right? And especially if you have years of cuts to that system, and you don't have many beds and you don't have as many ventilators and what have you as you otherwise would, say, compared to other countries. And compared to what you used to have, then what ends up happening is you end up having to make decisions. Do we have this person on the ventilator? Do we have this person on the ventilator?
And it's actually,
right?
real quick, that's why I think that doctors are being put on the same level now that soldiers were after 9/11, because doctors are going to have to make these decisions and make these calls that are going to haunt them for the rest of their life, because they're going to have to look at someone and know that they could be treated, but have to say, no, this person is autistic, or this person is elderly, or this person is insert reason. So we have to just let them die.
I think more likely elderly than autistic.
Yeah, well, in the United States, actually, there's, and this is something that a friend of the show, Misty, pointed out, that the medical instruction here in the U.S. actually outlines who should and shouldn't receive aid first, second, third, what have you. And people with mental conditions and mental disorders are actually on the list to receive aid last, at the same level as elderly patients. So it's something that, to me, is hyper eugenics, where they're literally trying to build up this propaganda around the doctors are the heroes, we're at war, the doctors are the frontline soldiers making these calls, when a decade from now, you're going to have doctors that will look back and be haunted by the people that they had to choose to let die because of the larger failings within the healthcare system. And instead of talking about that and addressing it a decade ago or a year ago or 4 to 5 months ago or 3 months ago when all of this started, there was nothing. There was radio silence. And now it's to the point that they want to build these doctors up to look like heroes, but it's really just going to be because they have to have something to keep them going because of the nightmare decisions that they're going to have to make, where someone could be treated, but they're in this category that says we shouldn't, so I'm going to give aid to this other person instead.
I think also it's a propaganda technique to sort of now is not a time for criticism. Now is a time for rallying together. Let's have a day of national clapping for the National Health Service. And of course, the National Health Service is very popular here and people want to say hooray. But it's also a way of distracting from maybe, if you saw this thing coming and you're one of the top 6 richest countries on the planet, say like the UK, then why don't you have more testing facilities? Why is it only now that when you're saying that you're actually not even testing frontline workers who are being exposed? I mean, I had a tweet sent to me by somebody in Scotland. Was it fifth confirmed Muslim immigrant doctor who came here, who's died now with COVID-19, who's been treating people with COVID-19, right? So they were trying to just note that particular story. And there's literally five tweets with 5 doctors and their names and where they originally came from 30 years ago, 40 years ago. They've all been working around the clock treating people with COVID-19. They've all died. It's all been confirmed that they all have it as well, right? So it's, in Italy, which has some of the highest death numbers, a lot of the numbers were coming out were health workers, right? And that's the other thing that puts pressure on a system, right? Is when your health workers then get sick, they're out of action, right? So then that means not only are there more sick people that the system has to deal with, especially in particular if they need hospitalization, but then that also means you don't have that particular emergency worker providing assistance to those who do need, and it just has this sort of knock-on effect. So people are saying, well, what's all this about? That many deaths is not that many people. More people die from car crashes, what have you. So yeah, around a country spread out over a year, the system is already designed to take care of a certain number of deaths, if you like. But when you have excess deaths and you have an unpredictable amount, when you have a system that's been cut to the bone, then this is what you end up getting, right? And there does seem to be a lot of we'll just let it play out kind of attitude that you've had here, which has sort of changed almost 180 degrees now with the British government, but it's only because of pressure. And I think one of the key things that feeds conspiracy theorizing, and by conspiracy theorizing, I mean fact-free conspiracy theories, is a lack of transparency. So if you don't understand the basis upon which decisions are being made, and you don't see certain modeling, right, because we're just being told the final decision, you're not showing your work, which now they're doing, right, because of pressure. Now they're showing models and all the rest of it from the government side, but before they weren't. People will just fill in the blanks themselves. You know what I mean?
Well, and we also have a lot of conflicting reports. We've got doctors who have gone on record saying we have to say that someone who died of heart disease is an asymptomatic carrier of COVID-19. We've got to say that someone who died from an ancillary illness is now the death is attributed to COVID-19. And then we've got Dr. Fauci or whatever the fuck his name is, standing up there at the podium every day, winning big points for taking zingers at Trump, but not necessarily addressing the root of the problem. And the root of the problem, at least in the United States, in terms of health workers and doctors, is that we've made college so inaccessible and so unaffordable to so many people that we simply don't have any reserve supply of nurses and doctors. We're screwed because we made college a status symbol for society instead of a one tool in your educational kit that is available to everybody.
And the other thing too is you have people like Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, who was literally trying to suspend the licenses of doctors and pharmacists prescribing hydrochloroquine and azithromycin and other drugs that have been proven around the world to at least be effective in treating this, which to me is absolutely insane. Because what I try to do when I find an article that's legitimately sourced, that has case studies attached to it, I try to share that with the doctors and nurses and people that I know in the medical sphere. Like, hey, there's this case study that came out of France that showed HCQ and azithromycin over a 6-day treatment course cured 40 out of 40 people. It's a small case study, it's a small sample, but there is no information actually being given directly to these people in the hospitals that are treating patients with COVID. And a lot of times it turns into the doctors just guessing off of the knowledge that they learned in school 15, 20, 40 years ago, trying to make decisions, and them themselves looking up what other doctors are doing. So if you can share information, legitimate information with case studies attached about cures and treatments with the medical professionals that you know, because it very well may save someone's life.
With that, I think I'm going to have to sign off because there's various other things I have to look at, and one of which actually is reading up on the latest sort of highly dense academic scientific reports, of which I can comprehend maybe 80%, and I just have to like look up other terms when it comes to COVID-19 and epidemiology. But thank you very much, guys, for having me on, and yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thanks so much, Mo. Mohammed Almazy. You can find his work in Sputnik and a number of other outlets. Mo had no, I'm not muted. Mo has a website called The Interregnum where he posts all of his thoughts, and he's on Twitter at MAE. I don't know if we're kicking over to the Wired article now or not. I know it's up next in the show doc. Anyone can jump in now.
Yeah, if we can go over to the Wired article, that would be awesome. And this is something Steve wanted to go through, but it is the coronavirus apocalypse myths. So this is actually, I think, super important to go through. If we can get that pulled up on screen here, Josh. Do you want to take it over, Steve?
Sure. And I'm not gonna read this whole thing or anything like that. It's just it caught my attention because we have been sort of culturally conditioned to expect some sort of apocalypse or, you know, world-ending zombie scenario, and it turns out that instead of, you know, road warrior outfits or your cousin Dave suddenly found a crossbow and now you're hiking through the Georgia woods killing zombies, you're at home in a robe and slippers. So it's a much different sort of rollout of all of these end of the world scenarios. And I just want to highlight I think it's about the 4th paragraph down where it says COVID-19 changed everything. Suddenly, the immense and frightening upheaval, the cataclysm that means nothing can go back to normal, is here. And it's so different from what we imagined. I was expecting Half-Life. I was expecting World War Z. I've been dressing like I'm in the Matrix since 2003. I was not expecting to be facing this sort of thing in snuggly socks, in a dressing gown, thousands of miles from home, trying not to panic, and craving a cup of proper tea. This apocalypse is less Danny Boyle and more Douglas Adams. And I agree with that 100%. And go get your motherfucking towel. There's an important difference between apocalypse and a catastrophe. A catastrophe is a total devastation with nothing left and nothing learned. Apocalypse, especially in the biblical sense, means a time of crisis and change, of hidden truths revealed, a time quite literally of revelation. When we talked about the end of every certainty, we were not expecting any revelation. We were not expecting it to be so silly, so sweet, and so sad. And this is where it really gets into the prevailing economic system globally. So I don't know if somebody else wants to pick up here because I basically do this rant like every third show.
Yeah, it's easier to imagine the world ending than the end of capitalism. It's a slogan that swarmed around the world 10 years ago during the Occupy movement, attributed to various Frederick Jamesons, and I can't pronounce that name. I had it explained to me by an overexcited, underslept young activist who, like the rest of us, had spent their lives watching New York, London, Washington, and Tokyo blow up and burn on screen, and had never had a space to imagine a future that did not include decades of striving to service long life debts. Capitalism requires this of us. Capitalism is cannot imagine a future beyond itself that is not utterly butchery. This isn't the late capitalism that's always has been a death cult. The tiny minded, incompetent, in charge cannot handle the problem that cannot be simply fixed by sacrificing poor, vulnerable, and otherwise expendable individuals. Faced with a crisis they cannot solve with violence, they something in wine and waste time that cannot be otherwise counted in corpses. There has been no vision because the men never imagined a future beyond the image of themselves at the top of the human heap, casting gold. For weeks, the speeches from podiums have suggested a certain amount of brutal death is a reasonable price for other people to pay to protect the current financial system. The airwaves have been filled with spineless right wing zealots so focused on putting a win in social Darwinism that they keep accidentally saying the quiet bit out loud. The quiet bit in this.
So,
Yeah,
okay, go ahead.
No, my reading's
yeah,
terrible.
go ahead. I was gonna talk about that. Well, I was gonna talk about this for a second because the only thing that I kind of take issue with in this entire piece is the line, faced with a crisis they can't solve with violence, they dithered and whined and wasted time. And that's not, to at least the way that it's been coming out in terms of everything from Lockstep to go read Whitney Webb's article, All Roads Lead to Dark Winter, and Event 201. Nobody in a position of power was surprised by this. Nobody. Which makes the quiet part even a little bit more savage. And the quiet bit is this: to the rich and stupid, many of the economic measures necessary to stop this virus are so unthinkable that it would be preferable for millions to die. This is extravagantly wrong on more than just a moral level. Forcing sick and contagious people back to work to save Wall Street puts us all at risk. It is not only easier for these overpromoted imbeciles to imagine the end of the world than a single restriction on capitalism. They would actually prefer it. And that quiet part is why nobody in power was surprised by this. You can't look at this anymore as any less than a culling. And I don't have an immediate answer to what we do to stop it collectively other than at-home general strike.
To me, it really comes to, and I'm not even anti-capitalist, just to clarify. I'm not anti-capitalist, I'm not anti-socialist, I'm post-partisan. I'm for finding solutions to the problems that we face now and the problems that we will face in the future based on the steps that we have taken now. And honestly, community is really the only way that we can solve these problems. Getting in mutual aid groups, getting farms started, to Steve's point of what we can do. Because you can be a good distance away from someone, wearing a mask, wearing gloves, working a field that you understand is designed to feed everyone in your community. And it's not the best solution, it's not a great solution, but it addresses the immediate need of how are we going to feed each other? And then it allows the city to start to think in those terms, and for your community to think, okay, well, if we can sustain each other this way, what's the next step that we can take in this process? Because I inherently don't think the government's job at centralized authority levels is to solve problems. I think it's to protect the individual liberties of the people that exist within that taxation zone. But at the same time, there is so much power that can come from a community to solve its own issues, especially in a time of crisis, that people just haven't been taught to draw upon. So I think that that's something that's super important too. And it also builds to where if we can have food security as a utility on the local level, our ability to produce a general strike is that much greater because we don't have to rely on food delivery services. We don't have to rely on the global distribution and production of food to feed someone halfway around the world. So it seems silly, but it's something that Steve and I have talked about since the very beginning. Be the one person in your community that's going to try to make a difference in your community. Be the one person protest. Be that one voice that bugs every city council person about what are we doing in this time right now to make a difference for our citizens and to reduce the greater burden that's being placed upon the state and federal and even global systems and supply chains at this point.
Well, and let me make this clear too. I personally believe that all of our isms have failed us. I don't think that communism or capitalism or socialism or fucking libertarianism or fucking Blair Witchism or whatever the fuck I don't care. It has failed us. And what I've always advocated for is a collective ascension to a pathway to as the bulwark of a pathway to a sustainable future. I've talked about, the most revolutionary thing that you can really do is make your community food secure since I started coming on the air with the show. What that does, though, and how that can be achieved in lockdown scenarios is, as Andrew was suggesting, you have to put that out in a mutual aid group. Everybody that has a goddamn Facebook account is part of a local coronavirus fucking whatever group. Like, I'm assuming, but my ass got thrown into like 3 of them, and I don't even go on Facebook. So I'm guessing. So if that is a situation that you're in, if you still have a Facebook account, put that out there. Let's get food secure as soon as possible. If you live in a farming community, or if you live near a farming community that delivers to restaurants, there aren't any fucking restaurants anymore. So call those people and try and get a food distribution network that is as locally sourced as possible up and operating. We have something similar to that here. And I think that I think you can handle that in almost every rural area. Getting it into a city might require a little bit more logistics along a supply chain, but work on your anarchist supply chains.
And something to support local small businesses. If there's a mom and pop coffee shop that you like going to, go there every single day to get your coffee. If there's a small gas station that's an owner operator kind of project, go there instead of the large chains. When you go grocery shopping, try to find the smallest locally owned store that you can. Because at the end of the day, this is a direct assault. The rollout of the measures is a direct assault against small business and against working people. So if there's a little restaurant that you like going to every once in a while, go there every single day right now, because they need people to purchase their product in this short time. So that way, 4 months from now, they can still be in business and don't get purchased up by a larger multinational conglomerate that's just received $4 trillion in a bailout. So support the small people in your community, the small businesses, the mom and pop restaurants, the best that you can. Because there's going to come a time where they're forced to close their doors if they don't have people helping them keep them open. So if you and 3 people you know can order from one place every day with the intention of, I want to make sure they can stay in business, then do that. Because right now, supporting the community and supporting the people most directly around you is one of the most important things that we can do. Do we want to move forward into the 2011 interview about the spy files, though?
Yeah, I was gonna say we've been going for about 90 minutes. We might as well start our wrap up here. And I included this clip into the show doc. It is a little bit longer, but I think it's totally worthwhile to listen to because Julian Assange has consistently gotten it right years and years and years early. And this is a 2011 interview, and what he's talking about then is what we are experiencing and have experienced for a number of years now. And people may not be aware of the extent of the surveillance apparatus. They may not be aware of the fact that Julian Assange is a master prognosticator. So if we can pull that up and roll it, that would be fantastic. And then we'll pop back in for a second and close out.
Different faces of Julian Assange in the last 6 months, but the suit and the short haircut is new. Is this a new image, or is it courtroom Assange?
Well, it's when you're in this business, people will try and take any point they can to malign you and stop the power of your publication, and so that's I guess the same reasons why politicians dress so conservatively when they're under constant attack, and so that's something that I have to do in order to keep the focus on our material and keep the focus off me.
Well, it's been an uphill battle keeping the focus off you. Has it surprised you, the intensity of attention upon you?
I don't think it's surprised me. If you look at if you think about the situation carefully, I suppose that's inevitable. That someone who's associated with a new endeavour that is very controversial and has a lot of very powerful enemies will be the subject of ad hominem attacks on the person if they can't get an attack on the content. That's standard fare. Of course, it's a new situation for me personally. I'm used to some.
You've been pretty much a secretive, or certainly a private guy, or your life.
Not entirely, but I have been part of other causes in the past. But certainly, the level of scrutiny and the level of attacks on my person is like nothing else I've experienced. Possibly, with some exceptions, like nothing else anyone in Australia has experienced. Maybe Lindy Chamberlain is probably had a similar level of attacks against her person.
Well, it's been a pretty steep learning curve, I guess, in the last few months. Any regrets on how you've handled that journey?
Not regrets, but lessons to be learnt is the way I like to put it. We are all limited by our resources and time and so on, and these can't come from nowhere, and you're constrained by them. But from that experience, certainly I've learnt a lot about how to deal with some of those attacks that we get.
Well, you would have expected some of the attacks clearly from governments or other people that are subjected to WikiLeaks material, but you've also had a steady barrage of friendly fire from people that have been friends or associates or professional collaborators. It's been almost endless. Has that surprised you? There's only been one friend and associate. There's been other associates from the newspapers. It is actually quite interesting. We saw even early on that there were some people who perceive themselves to be competitors within our field of play. And a lot of that is who is going to be represented as the vanguard of liberalism, who is going to be seen to be the shining light in that region. Is it the Guardian newspaper? Is it the New York Times within the United States? And then at a sort of government accountability level, there's also other smaller groups like Secrecy Newsletter,
no one's ever really heard of it, but within that area, it's one of the few groups operating. Cryptome is another small site, but nonetheless operating in that area. And actually, that's where we had the first continuous attacks from. It's quite interesting that although people can claim to hold certain values as the number one motivator in their life, when you look at the actual behaviour, what you see is that the number one motivator tends to be keeping their power within their perceived community, and threats to power within their perceived community are seen as threats and are dealt with accordingly.
I'd like to get back to that, but just before we move on, one question I haven't asked you is the current extradition hearings. I know we're yet to hear the final witnesses, but what's been your experience so far? How do you think it's going?
I think a lot has come out into the public domain that wasn't there previously.
That's been a sense of relief to you. You said
that's a sense of relief to me. I mean, because it's an ongoing legal process, it's not something that I can talk about the facts of the matter, and that yet at the same time we have seen other parties, Swedish government, and uncertain individuals.
They're leaking, ironically enough.
They're violating their own laws and feeding out selective bits of the material and selective allegations to the media, where we cannot do that if we are to follow the practice and the law. And that's something that's been very difficult. So it is a relief to finally now have a court process where some of this material is coming up. Most isn't, because
it's not relevant to an extradition as such.
Well, European extradition hearings and the treaties that the United Kingdom has with the rest of Europe, and incidentally also with the United States, are such that they do not depend on the evidence at all, or even the complaint in
they're
detail.
Almost pro forma.
They're pro forma. They are forms. It is literally ticker box justice.
And whether that's been properly conducted. But if you were to win this case, it would be a landmark decision. That the presumption is that extraditions do go ahead. But if you do win it, you've still got an arrest warrant out on you. It'll be extremely limiting to you if that occurs. Can you travel?
Well, it will be appealed regardless of how this goes. For sure, the prosecution will appeal it, or we'll appeal it.
Yeah, but even assuming the best, which a lot of commentators aren't assuming that you'll be victorious, but even if you are, it's not a comfortable situation to be in, to have an arrest warrant out on you. You won't be able to go to Europe. You presumably can't go to the United States.
Well, if we win, I mean, it may well. If we win, and looking at the amount of evidence that is now coming out into the public about what has happened and the procedural abuses, I mean, the political flavour may be such in Sweden that
it could influence
it's time to get rid of the thing. But we still have this brewing indictment in the United States for espionage, and that will come in any moment.
Sometime.
And that's
sometime. Well, I'm sure they're quite comfortable to watch you be skewered on some other charge at the moment.
That's not my reading. Certainly, the Washington is quite happy for that. It's in that political elite and power nexus, and people with influence in Washington are happy for that. But remember, there's a lot of careers to be made here. There's a lot of careers for prosecutors. There's a lot of careers in the FBI.
You can cut it here, Josh.
It's already a very famous case in the United States, and people aren't going to.
So I think that's going to do it for us. I'm unsure if Taylor's internet is working or not. Taylor, if you're here, you're welcome to close out.
Okay.
If you're not, blink 3 times on a frozen screen.
Okay, I hope it's working. Everybody's been cutting out a little bit. I think that right now, and I could be wrong here, Josh would be able to better talk about this, but I'm wondering if because the internet is being used so much right now because everybody's at home, maybe that's why our internet is just really bizarre. I don't know, but I just want to thank everybody. It's just mine. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I've just had some issues with it. So been trying my best to kind of stick along here. But yeah, I think it's my laptop, but I will be fixing that as of next week. I took some measures to make sure this doesn't continue happening. But I want to thank everybody for joining us on this Saturday. I want to thank our two guests, Gordon Dimick and Mohammed Almazi, returning guests from the UK. And they're able to make it on this stream, of course, because it's a little bit earlier. And again, we do have new times for our vigils. We will be holding them Tuesdays and Thursdays at 9 p.m. and on Saturdays at 1 p.m. And again, that is 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 6 p.m. Pacific Time. So again, thank you everybody for joining us. Stay safe, be careful, and you can follow me on Twitter at _Taylor Hudak and on Instagram at journalist_Taylor.
Yeah, my name's Andrew Smith. You can find me on Twitter at Andrew Zigman. You can find Action for Assange on Twitter at action_4 Assange. You can also go to actionforassange.com where you can find what we call our Thursday Activist Toolkit. Basically, what we're trying to do is encourage everyone to engage their state and local reps in multiple different ways, where we have a fax system that you can use set up with ResistBot, contacting Congress, which gives you the phone numbers and addresses for their federal office in DC, but also all of their local offices throughout their districts for federal representatives. And then another tool which allows you to look up the social media accounts of whatever representative from the U.S. Congress that you'd like to use. Christine often tweets out that, or a tool that you can use to find the contact information for MPs over in England. So I would encourage everybody to take a look at that as well if you're over in the UK right now. But yeah, I would just again like to say thank you for everybody that watched us, for everybody behind the scenes like Josh and Kimber that help keep this going every week. And yeah.
My name is Steve Poikinen. I have a show called Slow News Day, which you can find on the YouTubes by typing in Slow News Day Podcast. I am also now streaming on Periscope, Facebook, and DLive. So if you are watching this and you don't like coming to YouTube, there are other options for that show. I am putting out a ton of content during lockdown and more up on my Patreon. YouTube has decided to hide my recent upstreams. I had a fantastic conversation with Sean O'Brien, frequent flyer on the vigils here, and return guest on my show. It is worth watching, and that's mostly because I don't talk during it. Sean is a hell of a guy. So look for that on other platforms. Tomorrow I will be joined by Jared and Elizabeth Beck for a little bit longer and more wide-ranging conversation than we had with them on the vigil the other night. I love all of you. Thank you so much for being a part of this with us. Big thanks to Gordon and Mo, Sleepy Josh on the ones and twos, and my co-hosts. That will do it for this vigil. We will see you Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central. Good luck to us all.